On May 19, 1994, a warm spring afternoon settled over New York City's Upper East Side. Inside apartment 1040 at 1040 Fifth Avenue overlooking Central Reservoir in Central Park, Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis lay in her bedroom, surrounded by the people she loved most. At 64 years old, the woman the world had known as America's most elegant First Lady was taking her final breaths. The apartment was quiet that afternoon. Sunlight filtered through silk curtains, casting gentle shadows across walls lined with books and artwork. Her children, Caroline and John, sat beside her bed. Her longtime companion, Morris Templesman, held her hand. Outside, on Fifth Avenue, 15 floors below, the city moved on, unaware that in this private sanctuary, one of the 20th century's most public figures was slipping away from a world that had never stopped watching her. Jackie had been diagnosed with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma only 4 months earlier, in January 1994. She had faced the illness with the same quiet dignity that had defined her approach to every tragedy in her remarkable life. She had continued working at Doubleday Publishing House through February, editing manuscripts, meeting with authors, living the private creative life she had built for herself after so many years in the relentless public eye. When the cancer spread too aggressively for treatment to continue, she had made one final request: to die at home, in the apartment that had been her true sanctuary for 28 years. This was not the White House where she had walked through blood-spattered halls on November 22, 1963. This was not the mansion on Scorpios where she had tried to build a new life with Aristotle Onassis, only to find herself trapped in a different kind of golden cage. This was not even the childhood estates where young Jacqueline Bouvier had first learned that beauty and privilege came with their own imprisonments. This was 1040 Fifth Avenue, the place where she had finally found what had eluded her for so long: privacy, autonomy, and peace. The apartment had cost her $200,000 in 1964, a substantial sum that represented her determination to create a normal life for her children away from Washington's political machinery and the public's insatiable curiosity. Here, behind thick walls and heavy doors, she had raised Caroline and John Jr. through their teenage years. Here, she had built a life centered not around state dinners and protocol, but around books, art, ballet performances, and quiet family dinners. Here, she had transformed herself from political widow into working professional, waking each morning to edit manuscripts for Viking Press and later Doubleday, riding the subway to her office like any other New Yorker. The world knew Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis as an icon of style and grace, the young widow in the blood-stained pink suit, the international celebrity who married one of the world's richest men. But the woman dying peacefully in apartment 1040 that May afternoon had spent the last 3 decades of her life trying to escape those images, trying to become something more authentic than the carefully curated public persona that had been constructed around her since she was 24 years old. As evening approached and Jackie's breathing grew shallower, the apartment held the accumulated treasures of her carefully private life. First edition books lined custom shelves. Paintings by artists she had championed hung on walls she had personally designed. Photographs of her children and grandchildren sat on tables beside leather-bound volumes of poetry. Every object had been chosen with the exquisite taste that made her name synonymous with elegance, but more importantly, every object reflected her actual interests rather than public expectations. At 10:15 p.m. on May 19, 1994, Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis died in her bedroom at 1040 Fifth Avenue. The world would mourn America's former First Lady. Millions would remember the young woman who had redefined White House style, who had walked behind her husband's casket with unbearable grace, who had become a global symbol of elegance and tragedy. But those who knew her best understood that the woman who died that night was not the Jackie of Camelot mythology. She was a complex, deeply private person who had spent 40 years trying to build a life beyond the legend, who had succeeded in creating one true home where she could simply be herself. The apartment at 1045th Avenue was more than real estate. It was the physical manifestation of Jackie's determination to control her own narrative, to live on her own terms, to find peace after unimaginable public trauma. Within its walls, she had finally achieved what wealth and fame had never given her: the freedom to be ordinary, the luxury of privacy, the gift of becoming the person she actually wanted to be rather than the icon everyone expected. But to understand how this apartment became Jackie's sanctuary, how it represented everything she had fought for and finally won, we must travel back to a very different estate, to a childhood world of privilege that came with its own kind of imprisonment, to the beginning of a journey that would take Jacqueline Bouvier from gilded Long Island mansions to the White House, from international celebrity to quiet New York professional, from public monument to private person. Newport dreams. The story of Jacqueline Kennedy's hidden sanctuary begins not in New York, but on the manicured lawns of East Hampton and Newport, where a young girl named Jacqueline Lee Bouvier learned her first lessons about wealth, performance, and the price of belonging to America's social elite. She was born on July 28, 1929, at Southampton Hospital on Long Island, the first child of John Vernew Bouvier Roman III and Janet Norton Lee. Her father, known as Black Jack for his perpetual suntan and rakish good looks, was a stockbroker from one of America's oldest Catholic families, descendants of French aristocracy who had built their fortune in New York real estate. Her mother Janet came from Newer Money, the daughter of James Lee, a wealthy real estate developer and banker who had made his fortune in the booming 1920s economy. The marriage united old name with new wealth, aristocratic pedigree with American ambition. Jackie's earliest memories were formed at La Sada, her grandfather Bouvier's sprawling estate in East Hampton. The 14-acre property featured a Georgian-style mansion, manicured gardens, stables for horses, and the kind of pastoral elegance that defined old-money Long Island summer life. For young Jackie, La Sada meant freedom. She spent summers riding horses through the property's extensive grounds, developing the equestrian skills that would become her lifelong passion. She was fearless in the saddle even as a small child, competing in local horse shows by age 5, winning ribbons that she treasured as proof of her own merit rather than her family's status. But La Sada also taught Jackie her first lesson about the performance required of wealthy young women. Her grandfather demanded proper behavior at all times. Meals were formal affairs with strict etiquette. Children were expected to dress appropriately, speak correctly, and represent the family name with dignity. Janet reinforced these expectations with even greater intensity, drilling into Jackie the importance of posture, diction, manners, and appearance. Beauty and refinement were not merely advantages, they were requirements for maintaining social position. The contrast between Jackie's parents shaped her understanding of marriage and identity in profound ways. Black Jack was charming, affectionate, and utterly unreliable. He adored his daughters, showering them with attention and gifts, but his compulsive womanizing and heavy drinking made him a destructive husband. Janet was disciplined, ambitious, and determined to secure her daughters' futures through advantageous marriages. The tension between them created a household where love was conditional, where maintaining appearances mattered more than authentic emotion, where a woman's value was measured by the man she married rather than her own accomplishments. Jackie attended the best schools Manhattan and Long Island offered. At the Chapin School on the Upper East Side, she was a strong student with particular talent for literature and languages. Her teachers noted her intelligence and creativity, but also her tendency toward introversion, her preference for books over people. She wrote poetry in private notebooks, created elaborate drawings, and read voraciously. These solitary pursuits became her refuge from the increasingly bitter war between her parents, from the pressure to be perfect, from the suffocating expectations of her social class. In 1940, when Jackie was 11, Her parents divorced in a scandal that shook New York society. The separation was brutal and public, with accusations of infidelity on both sides splashed across gossip columns. For Jackie and her younger sister Lee, the divorce meant choosing between parents, navigating loyalty conflicts, enduring whispered conversations among their social circle. It was Jackie's first experience with the gap between public image and private reality, with the way families could present elegance to the world while drowning in dysfunction behind closed doors. Janet remarried quickly in 1942 to Hugh Dudley Auchincloss Jr., a wealthy Standard Oil heir who owned multiple estates including Hammersmith Farm in Newport, Rhode Island, and Marywood in McLean, Virginia. For Jackie, this meant new homes, new siblings from Auchincloss's previous marriages, and a new standard of wealth that surpassed even the Bouvier lifestyle. Hammersmith Farm was a 28-room Victorian mansion on 74 waterfront acres, with its own private beach, tennis courts, and spectacular views of Narragansett Bay. Marywood was a 46-room Georgian mansion on 46 acres along the Potomac River, complete with stables, gardens, and woodland trails. These estates provided material comfort beyond most people's imagining, but they also reinforced the cage Jackie felt closing around her. At Hammersmith Farm, she continued her riding, spending hours alone with horses rather than at the endless social events her mother organized. At Marywood, she retreated to the library, reading French literature and writing in journals that expressed thoughts she could never voice publicly. She was learning to create private interior worlds within the luxurious prisons of wealth and social expectation. Jackie's education continued at Miss Porter's school in Connecticut, an elite boarding school that prepared wealthy young women for their expected futures as wives of important men. She excelled academically, particularly in French literature and art history, subjects that allowed her to imagine life beyond the prescribed path. Her classmates remembered her as elegant and aloof, admired but not particularly warm, someone who seemed to occupy a different plane of sophistication even among the daughters of America's wealthiest families. After graduating from Miss Porter's in 1947, Jackie attended Vassar College, one of the prestigious Seven Sisters schools, where elite young women received intellectual training they would rarely be permitted to use professionally. She studied literature and art history, spent her junior year abroad at the Sorbonne in Paris, and discovered in France a cultural approach to femininity that differed from the rigid American model. French women seemed to occupy intellectual and artistic spaces without sacrificing their femininity. They were taken seriously as thinkers and creators, not merely as decorative wives. Paris transformed Jackie's understanding of what her life might become. She explored museums and galleries, attended theatrical performances, studied French language and culture with genuine passion. For the first time, she experienced the freedom of anonymity, the pleasure of being valued for her mind rather than her family name. The year in Paris planted seeds of longing for a life of substance and privacy, for work that engaged her intelligence rather than merely displaying her taste. But when Jackie returned to America in 1950, she faced the inevitable expectations of her class and gender. She transferred to George Washington University to be closer to Marywood, completing her degree while her mother pressured her toward advantageous courtship. Janet had succeeded in marrying wealth and status twice. She expected her daughters to do the same. At 21, Jackie was beautiful, educated, sophisticated, and trapped by the understanding that her purpose was not to achieve on her own merits, but to marry someone who had. In 1951, through a casual connection, Jackie took a job that would change everything. She became the inquiring camera girl for the Washington Times-Herald, a position that required her to photograph Washington residents and ask them questions about current events for a light feature in the newspaper. The job paid $42 per week, far less than Jackie spent on a single outfit, but it provided something invaluable: legitimate work, a reason to engage with the world beyond her social circle, and the beginning of a career in journalism and publishing that would eventually become her truest vocation. As the inquiring camera girl, Jackie roamed Washington with her camera, interviewing senators, shopkeepers, students, tourists. She asked clever questions that revealed character, wrote witty captions that demonstrated her sharp intelligence. For the first time in her life, she was being noticed for what she created rather than who she was. The work was modest, but it represented autonomy, the possibility of an identity based on accomplishment rather than marriage. It was through this work, through her increasing presence in Washington's social and political circles, that Jackie met the man who would transform her from a wealthy young woman seeking purpose into the most watched woman in the world. In May 1952, at a dinner party, she was introduced to Congressman John Fitzgerald Kennedy, the ambitious young politician from Massachusetts who had already decided he would become president of the United States. Their courtship would change everything. Within 2 years, Jacqueline Bouvier would become the wife of a senator with presidential ambitions. Within 8 years, she would be First Lady. And the estates of her childhood, those mansions where she had learned to perform for society while hiding her true self, would be replaced by an even more demanding stage, an even more restrictive role, an even more impossible expectation of perfection. But young Jackie, accepting a diamond engagement ring from Jack Kennedy in June 1953, could not yet know that the life ahead would require her to perfect the art of public performance while protecting a fiercely guarded private self, or that 30 years later, she would finally create a home where she could stop performing entirely. White House by September 12, 1953, when Jacqueline Bouvier married John F. Kennedy at St. Mary's Church in Newport, Rhode Island. She was marrying not just a man but a political dynasty with presidential ambitions. The wedding at Hammersmith Farm brought together 800 guests from America's Catholic aristocracy and political establishment, with another 3,000 spectators crowding outside the estate to glimpse the bride. It was Jackie's first taste of the public obsession that would define her life for the next decade. The early years of marriage revealed the gulf between Jack's political world and Jackie's private nature. While Kennedy thrived on campaigning, on crowds and handshakes and endless public appearances, Jackie recoiled from the relentless exposure. She had been raised to value discretion and refinement. Political life demanded constant performance and superficial charm. She had cultivated intellectual interests in art and literature. Political life reduced her to smiling decoratively at rallies. She longed for depth and privacy. Jack's career required her to be perpetually on display. In 1954, Jack underwent dangerous back surgery that left him bedridden for months. During his recovery at their rented house in Palm Beach, Jackie read to him, managed his correspondence, and helped him work on the manuscript that would become Profiles in Courage, the best-selling book about senatorial integrity that would win the Pulitzer Prize in 1957. This collaboration revealed a partnership that transcended political performance, a genuine intellectual connection that would sustain their marriage through its many complications. Jackie's first pregnancy ended in miscarriage in 1955. Her second pregnancy produced a stillborn daughter, Arabella, in August 1956, a loss that devastated Jackie and revealed the emotional distance in their marriage. Jack was yachting in the Mediterranean when Arabella was delivered dead. He did not immediately return home, leaving Jackie to grieve alone in the hospital. The tragedy taught Jackie that she could not depend on her husband for emotional support, that she would need to develop her own inner strength to survive the demands of political life. On November 27, 1957, Jackie gave birth to Caroline Bouvier Kennedy at New York Hospital. For the first time, she experienced the uncomplicated joy of motherhood, the fierce protective love that would shape all her future choices. Caroline became Jackie's anchor, the person for whom she would endure any public scrutiny, make any sacrifice. When John Fitzgerald Kennedy Jr. was born on November 25, 1960, just weeks after Jack won the presidency, Jackie's determination to protect her children's privacy became the defining mission of her time as First Lady. The 1960 presidential campaign forced Jackie into unprecedented public exposure, despite being pregnant with John Jr. She gave interviews, appeared at rallies, and wrote a weekly newspaper column called Campaign Wife that showcased her intelligence and charm. She spoke Spanish to Hispanic voters, discussed art with intellectuals, and projected an image of youthful sophistication that contrasted sharply with the matronly style of previous political wives. She was 29 years old, beautiful, cultured, and deeply uncomfortable with the scrutiny, but she performed brilliantly because Jack's ambition demanded it. When John F. Kennedy was inaugurated as the 35th President of the United States on January 20th, 1961, Jacqueline Kennedy became First Lady at age 31, the third youngest in American history. The role came with an impossible job description: be beautiful but not vain, intelligent but not threatening, stylish but not frivolous, maternal but not invisible, public but not too revealing. Jackie would spend the next 2 years and 10 months trying to navigate these contradictions while protecting her children and preserving some fragment of her authentic self. Jackie's first act as First Lady was to transform the White House itself. She was appalled by the building's shabby state, its mismatched furniture, and lack of historical coherence. With characteristic determination, she launched a comprehensive restoration project, forming the Fine Arts Committee, recruiting experts in American decorative arts, and personally researching the building's history. She solicited donations of period furniture and artwork, created the position of White House curator, and worked to make the executive mansion into a proper museum of American history rather than a government office decorated with random cast-offs. The restoration revealed Jackie's genuine expertise in art and design, her meticulous research skills, and her ability to manage complex projects. On February 14, 1962, CBS broadcast a tour of the White House with Mrs. John F. Kennedy, a television special in which Jackie guided viewers through the restored rooms, explaining the historical significance of furniture, paintings, and decorative objects. 56 million Americans watched the program, which showcased not just the White House but Jackie's intelligence, knowledge, and quiet authority. For once, she was being admired for her actual accomplishments rather than merely her appearance. As First Lady, Jackie championed the arts with unprecedented vigor. She invited legendary cellist Pablo Casals to perform at the White House, hosted an evening honoring Nobel Prize winners, and brought French culture to Washington by hosting a state dinner for French Minister of Culture André Malraux. These events transformed the White House into a center of cultural sophistication, challenging American anti-intellectualism and demonstrating that art and literature deserved the same respect as business and politics. But the public role came at enormous personal cost. Jackie was photographed constantly, every outfit analyzed, every expression scrutinized. Fashion magazines obsessed over her pillbox hats, her sleeveless dresses, her bouffant hairstyle. Women copied her look compulsively, making her a fashion icon whether she wanted the title or not. The attention was suffocating for someone who valued privacy so intensely. She retreated whenever possible to the family quarters, to time alone with Caroline and John, to the private spaces where she could stop performing. Jackie's relationship with the press was complicated and carefully managed. She granted few interviews, maintained strict boundaries around her children's privacy, and cultivated an image of mysterious elegance by revealing very little. She understood intuitively that mystique required distance, that the public would remain fascinated only if she never fully exposed herself. This protective reserve would serve her well in the years ahead, when she would need every psychological defense she had developed. In August 1963, Jackie gave birth prematurely to Patrick Bouvier Kennedy, who died 2 days later from respiratory distress syndrome. The loss devastated Jackie, who had already endured 1 miscarriage and 1 stillbirth. For the first time, the public saw genuine vulnerability in the composed First Lady. The tragedy briefly softened Jack's compulsive infidelities, bringing the couple closer than they had been in years. That fall, they seemed to have reached a new understanding, a mature partnership that might finally sustain them through the demands of public life. On November 22, 1963, Jackie accompanied Jack to Dallas, Texas, for a political trip meant to shore up support in a crucial state. She wore a pink Chanel suit with a matching pillbox hat, an outfit chosen to project optimism and elegance. At 12:30 p.m. Central Time, as their motorcade passed through Dealey Plaza, shots rang out. President Kennedy was struck twice, once in the neck and once fatally in the head. Jackie cradled her dying husband in the back of the limousine, her pink suit soaked with his blood, as the car raced to Parkland Memorial Hospital. At 1:00 p.m., President John F. Kennedy was pronounced dead. At 2:38 p.m., Lyndon B. Johnson was sworn in as president aboard Air Force One, with Jackie standing beside him still wearing the blood-stained suit. "Let them see what they've done," she said when urged to change clothes, transforming her trauma into political statement, her grief into historical witness. Jackie's conduct during the 4 days between assassination and burial created the public image that would define her forever. She planned Kennedy's funeral with meticulous attention to historical precedent, modeling it after Abraham Lincoln's funeral a century earlier. She walked behind the caisson carrying her husband's coffin, leading her children and the nation in public mourning with a dignity that seemed almost superhuman. On what would have been John Jr.'s third birthday, November 25th, the little boy saluted his father's casket on Jackie's whispered instruction, creating one of the 20th century's most iconic images. The world marveled at Jackie's composure, her grace under unbearable pressure, her ability to transform personal tragedy into national ritual. But behind the public performance, she was shattered. She had witnessed her husband's murder, held his shattered head, felt his life end in her arms. The trauma was profound and permanent, a wound that would shape every decision she made for the rest of her life. In the weeks after the assassination, Jackie remained in the White House while Lyndon Johnson respectfully delayed moving in. But she knew she could not stay in Washington, could not raise her children in the goldfish bowl of political life, could not endure the constant reminders of what she had lost and witnessed. She needed to escape, to build a new life away from politics and public service, to find a place where she and her children could begin to heal. On December 6, 1963, 2 weeks after the assassination, Jackie moved out of the White House into a borrowed Georgetown house. She was 34 years old, a widow with 2 young children, the most famous woman in America, and utterly determined to reclaim some measure of privacy and control over her life. She would never live in Washington again. Her next home would need to be different, private, protective. A sanctuary where she could finally stop performing the role of perfect political wife and become simply a mother protecting her traumatized children. That home would be in New York, in a building overlooking Central Park, in an apartment that would become her fortress against the world's intrusive gaze. Fifth Avenue in the spring of 1964, less than 6 months after President Kennedy's assassination, Jacqueline Kennedy made a decision that would define the rest of her life. She purchased apartment 1040 at 1040 Fifth Avenue, a 15-room cooperative on the corner of 5th Avenue and 85th Street, directly across from Central Park and the Metropolitan Museum of Art. The apartment cost $200,000, a substantial sum that represented her determination to create a normal, private life for Caroline and John away from Washington's political machinery and the public's insatiable curiosity about the widowed First Lady. The building itself was perfect for Jackie's needs. Constructed in 1925, 1045th Avenue was designed by architect Rosario Candela, whose buildings defined luxury apartment living on Manhattan's Upper East Side. The 15-story structure featured only 1 or 2 apartments per floor, ensuring privacy and exclusivity. The cooperative board was notoriously selective, accepting only residents who met rigorous standards of wealth, discretion, and social standing. For Jackie, seeking to shield her children from constant public attention, the building's reputation for protecting residents' privacy made it ideal. Apartment 1040 occupied the entire 10th floor, providing Jackie with approximately 4,000 square feet of living space overlooking Central Park and the city skyline. The layout included 5 bedrooms, allowing private space for Jackie, Caroline, John, and live-in staff, plus guest accommodations. The formal rooms included a large living room with park views, a proper dining room for entertaining, and a library that would become Jackie's favorite retreat. Jackie hired society decorator Sister Parrish to transform the apartment into a home that reflected her personal taste rather than historical protocol. Parrish, who had helped with the White House restoration, understood Jackie's aesthetic preferences: French and American antiques, pale colors, natural fabrics, and an overall atmosphere of relaxed elegance rather than formal grandeur. The goal was to create rooms that felt lived in and comfortable, where children could actually play rather than merely be displayed. The living room featured large windows overlooking Central Park's reservoir and tree canopy, providing natural light and views that changed with seasons. Jackie filled the room with comfortable sofas covered in cream and pale blue fabrics, antique tables displaying books and photographs, and carefully chosen artwork that included paintings she had collected over years. The space felt sophisticated but not intimidating, elegant but not cold, a room designed for actual conversation rather than ceremonial entertaining. The dining room could seat 12 comfortably, allowing Jackie to host intimate dinners for friends rather than the massive state dinners she had endured as First Lady. She chose a round table, which encouraged conversation and eliminated hierarchical seating. The room's walls were painted a warm cream color, and Jackie displayed American landscape paintings that reflected her appreciation for the country's artistic heritage without making political statements. The library became Jackie's sanctuary within the sanctuary. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves held her extensive collection of literature, poetry, art history, and French novels. She installed a comfortable reading chair near the window where she could spend hours reading manuscripts for work or simply escaping into books. The room reflected her intellectual life, the private world of thought and creativity that had sustained her through years of public performance. Jackie's bedroom was designed as a private retreat with park views and a seating area where she could have morning coffee while reading newspapers. She chose pale colors and simple furnishings, avoiding the ornate decoration expected of someone of her social position. The room included a desk where she could write letters, edit manuscripts, and maintain the personal correspondence that connected her to friends while maintaining boundaries with the broader public. Caroline and John each had their own bedrooms decorated age-appropriately, but with enough sophistication to grow with them. Jackie wanted her children to have normal childhoods despite their extraordinary circumstances, so their rooms included space for homework, play, and privacy. She was determined that 1045th Avenue would feel like a real home, not a museum or a shrine to their father's memory. The apartment's most remarkable feature was something less tangible than architecture or decoration: its privacy. The building's location meant Jackie could walk through Central Park with her children, visit the Metropolitan Museum just across the street, and blend into Manhattan's Upper East Side life more easily than anywhere else. New Yorkers, despite their awareness of celebrity, generally respected personal space in ways Washington never had. The city offered anonymity through density, privacy through indifference, freedom through the understanding that everyone, no matter how famous, deserved to live their life without constant intrusion. Jackie established strict rules about photography and press access. The building staff was trained to prevent paparazzi from entering or photographing residents. Jackie never granted interviews from the apartment, never allowed it to be photographed for magazines, and maintained absolute boundaries between her public image and her private home. The apartment was off-limits to the world, a line she enforced with quiet but absolute determination. The neighborhood supported Jackie's desire for normal life. She could walk to PS 6, the public school where John attended kindergarten, or to collegiate school where he later enrolled. She could shop at nearby stores, though she usually sent staff to avoid attracting crowds. She could take her children to Central Park's playgrounds and carousel, to the Natural History Museum, to the zoo, giving them experiences shared by thousands of New York children rather than the isolated existence of political royalty. Within the apartment's walls, Jackie created rhythms of ordinary family life. There were regular bedtimes and homework sessions, family dinners at the kitchen table rather than formal dining room, movie nights watching films projected on a screen in the living room. She cooked simple meals herself sometimes, helped with homework, read bedtime stories. These mundane rituals were precious to Jackie precisely because they were mundane, because they represented the normal motherhood she had been denied in the White House. The apartment also became Jackie's base for building a professional identity separate from her political past. In 1975, after years of focusing entirely on motherhood, Jackie took a job as consulting editor at Viking Press, beginning the career in publishing that would define her final 2 decades. She worked on manuscripts at the apartment's library desk, met with authors in the formal living room, and approached her editorial work with the same meticulous attention to detail she had brought to the White House restoration. When Jackie moved to Doubleday in 1978, her professional life deepened. She worked 4 days per week at the publisher's office, editing books about subjects she genuinely cared about: ballet, historic preservation, literature, photography, culture. She took the subway to work like any other New Yorker, carried her own manuscripts home in a tote bag, and lived the intellectual life she had imagined in Paris as a young woman. The apartment supported this professional identity by providing a serious workspace and a place to entertain authors and colleagues in settings that reinforced her expertise and authority. Jackie's relationship with Morris Tempelsman, which began in the late 1970s, brought a different kind of domesticity to 1045th Avenue. Tempelsman, a wealthy diamond merchant and art collector, shared Jackie's intellectual interests and understood her need for privacy. Unlike Jacqueline Onassis, whose enormous wealth had trapped Jackie in a different kind of public spectacle during their marriage from 1968 to 1975, Tempelsman was content with a private relationship built on genuine companionship rather than public display. The apartment witnessed Caroline's growing up from traumatized child to accomplished young woman, her graduation from Radcliffe, her marriage to Edwin Schlossberg in 1986, and the birth of Jackie's grandchildren. It witnessed John's transformation from the little boy saluting his father's coffin to the striking young man who became an assistant district attorney and later founded George magazine. The apartment held family celebrations, holiday gatherings, and the ordinary accumulation of shared memories that constitute real life rather than historical performance. As Jackie entered her 60s, the apartment reflected her evolution from political widow to accomplished professional, from grieving mother to engaged grandmother, from public icon to private person. The rooms held first editions of books she had edited, photographs of her grandchildren, artwork she had collected based on genuine appreciation rather than investment value. Every object told a story about her actual life, rather than the mythological version the public still imagined. The apartment's true value, however, was never measured in square footage or Manhattan real estate prices. It was measured in the freedom it provided, the privacy it protected, the ordinary life it enabled. After years of living in mansions and estates that belonged to her parents, her husband, or the American people, Jackie finally owned a home that was entirely hers, a space where she controlled the guest list, set the rules, and lived according to her own preferences rather than political necessity or social expectation. On January 22, 1994, when Jackie was diagnosed with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, she was determined to spend whatever time remained in the apartment that had been her sanctuary for 30 years. She continued working through February, editing manuscripts at her library desk, maintaining the professional identity that meant so much to her. When treatment proved ineffective and doctors acknowledged the cancer was terminal, Jackie made plans to die at home, surrounded by the books and artwork and photographs that represented her actual life rather than her public legend. The apartment at 1045th Avenue had witnessed Jackie's transformation from devastated widow to independent professional, from the most public woman in America to a fiercely private person who had finally claimed the right to live on her own terms. Within its walls, she had raised her children, built her career, found love again, and created the authentic life that had eluded her through decades of performing for others' expectations. Golden years for 20 years, from 1964 to 1984. Apartment 1040 at 1045th Avenue served as Jackie's fortress against a world that refused to stop watching her. These were the years when she transformed herself from tragedy's most famous widow into a working professional with genuine accomplishments. When she protected her children's privacy, fiercely enough to give them relatively normal childhoods. When she finally built a life based on her own interests rather than her husband's ambitions or the public's expectations. The daily rhythms Jackie established at Fifth Avenue reflected her determination to create ordinary family life despite extraordinary circumstances. Mornings began early, with Jackie rising at 7 to read newspapers over coffee in her bedroom before waking Caroline and John. She insisted on family breakfasts at the kitchen table, simple meals of cereal and fruit rather than elaborate affairs served by staff. She reviewed her children's homework, signed permission slips for school trips, and managed the logistics of dentist appointments and play dates like any other Upper East Side mother. Jackie walked her children to school whenever possible, a simple act that required complex security arrangements but represented her commitment to normal parenting. She attended parent-teacher conferences at Collegiate and Sacred Heart, sat through school plays and concerts, and volunteered for class trips. Teachers and other parents learned to treat her as just another mother rather than a celebrity, partly because Jackie's quiet dignity discouraged inappropriate attention, and partly because Manhattan's culture of respecting privacy made such treatment possible. Afternoons, when Caroline and John were at school, Jackie pursued her own interests with the same intensity she brought to motherhood. She took French literature classes at Columbia University, studied art history at the Metropolitan Museum just across Fifth Avenue, and maintained an extensive correspondence with writers, artists, and intellectuals who shared her passions. She read voraciously, averaging several books per week, filling notebooks with observations and ideas that would later inform her editorial work. The apartment became a gathering place for carefully chosen friends who respected Jackie's boundaries and shared her intellectual interests. She hosted small dinner parties limited to 8 or 10 guests, serving simple but elegant meals prepared by her cook. Conversations ranged across art, literature, politics, and culture, but Jackie enforced an unspoken rule against discussing the Kennedy assassination or her time as First Lady. She was living forward, not backward, and wanted relationships based on present interests rather than past tragedy. Jackie's friendship with author George Plimpton exemplified the kind of connection she valued. Plimpton, a celebrated writer and editor, treated Jackie as an intellectual equal rather than a celebrity curiosity. They discussed books and writing craft, attended cultural events together, and maintained a friendship built on genuine mutual respect. Similarly, her relationship with fashion designer Carolina Herrera was based on shared aesthetic sensibilities rather than mere social positioning. These friendships sustained Jackie's sense of herself as a person with substance beyond her famous name. Weekends often took Jackie and her children to New Jersey horse country, where she continued the riding that had been her passion since childhood. She purchased a horse named Frank for Caroline and taught both children equestrian skills at the Piedmont Hunt in Virginia. Riding provided Jackie with physical freedom and accomplishment unrelated to her public identity. In the saddle, she was simply a skilled horsewoman rather than the former First Lady, evaluated on her riding ability rather than her historical significance. Summer meant escaping New York's heat for extended stays at estates in New Jersey, and later at the Kennedy compound in Hyannisport. Jackie maintained complicated relationships with the Kennedy family, appreciating their support while resenting their expectation that she would remain forever defined by her brief marriage to Jack. She navigated these family dynamics carefully, ensuring her children maintained connections to their father's family while establishing their own independent identities. Jackie's relationship with Aristotle Onassis, which began in 1968 and led to their marriage in October of that year, complicated her New York life significantly. Onassis was one of the world's richest men, a Greek shipping magnate who owned a private island, a massive yacht, and businesses spanning multiple countries. Their marriage shocked the world and disappointed many Americans who had cherished Jackie as their martyred president's widow. But Jackie had her reasons. Onassis offered financial security for her children, physical protection from persistent stalkers and paparazzi, and escape from the Kennedy family's suffocating expectations. The marriage meant Jackie divided time between New York and Scorpios, Onassis's private Greek island. She maintained the Fifth Avenue apartment as her true home base, while spending months at a time on Onassis's yacht Christina or at his island compound. The arrangement was unconventional, but suited Jackie's needs during a period when she required distance from America's judgment and protection from obsessive public attention. But Onassis proved a difficult husband, prone to public cruelty and blatant infidelity. He humiliated Jackie by continuing his long-term affair with opera singer Maria Callas, by making disparaging comments about her spending to reporters, by treating her as an acquisition rather than a partner. The marriage deteriorated quickly, though it provided the financial resources and privacy Jackie needed for her children during their crucial teenage years. When Onassis died in March 1975, Jackie faced another wave of intrusive public attention, though nothing compared to the aftermath of Kennedy's assassination. She negotiated a settlement with the Onassis family that provided approximately $26 million, ensuring financial security for the rest of her life. More importantly, Onassis's death freed Jackie to return fully to New York, to the apartment and the life she had been building there, to the possibility of creating an identity entirely her own. In September 1975, at age 46, Jackie took a job as consulting editor at Viking Press. The position paid $200 per week, a laughably small salary for someone of her wealth, but money was never the point. Jackie wanted meaningful work, intellectual engagement, and an identity based on accomplishment rather than marriage. She approached the job with characteristic intensity, working with authors on manuscripts, attending editorial meetings, and gradually developing expertise in publishing. Her colleagues at Viking treated her with initial skepticism. Was this famous woman serious about work, or merely dabbling? But Jackie quickly proved her commitment. She arrived punctually, read manuscripts thoroughly, provided thoughtful editorial feedback, and approached authors with genuine respect for their work. She edited books on subjects she cared about: ballet, Russian culture, historic preservation. Her most significant early project was editing In the Russian Style, a book about Russian decorative arts that reflected her own scholarly interests. When Jackie moved to Doubleday in 1978, her professional identity solidified. She worked 4 days per week in Doubleday's office, taking the subway to work and carrying manuscripts home in canvas tote bags like any other editor. She developed a specialty in acquiring and editing books about culture, arts, and history, using her personal connections to attract major authors while applying rigorous editorial standards to their work. Jackie's editorial projects reflected her genuine passions and expertise. She edited Diana Vreeland's memoirs, bringing her understanding of fashion and style to shape the legendary editor's autobiography. She acquired and edited Moonwalk, Michael Jackson's autobiography, demonstrating willingness to work across cultural boundaries. She championed books about historic preservation, French culture, ballet, photography, and architecture, subjects she had studied seriously for decades rather than merely appreciated casually. Her relationship with authors was professional and warm. She provided detailed editorial feedback, encouraged writers through difficult revisions, and used her influence to ensure their books received proper attention. Authors appreciated her genuine engagement with their work, her insightful questions, and her ability to see manuscripts' potential even in rough form. She was not merely a celebrity lending her name. She was a skilled editor making substantive contributions. The work gave Jackie what she had sought since her year in Paris as a young woman: an intellectual life with real purpose, recognition for her actual abilities rather than her famous name, and daily proof that she was more than the roles assigned to her by marriage and tragedy. At Doubleday's office, she was Jackie the editor, valued for her judgment and expertise, not Jackie the widow or Jackie the icon. Back at Fifth Avenue each evening, Jackie maintained strict separation between professional and private life. She never discussed her authors with anyone outside the office, never used her home for business meetings unless absolutely necessary, and protected the apartment as a space dedicated to family and personal relationships rather than work. The boundaries she maintained were essential to preserving the private sanctuary she had worked so hard to create. During these golden years, Jackie also developed her relationship with Morris Tempelsman, the companion who would share her final decade. Tempelsman was married when they met, but his marriage was ending, and he shared with Jackie a love of literature, art, and culture. He was wealthy enough that money was never an issue, but private enough to value discretion. Their relationship was based on genuine intellectual companionship, shared interests, and mutual respect rather than public performance or social positioning. Tempelsman often stayed at the Fifth Avenue apartment, though they never married. He accompanied Jackie to cultural events, traveled with her, and provided steady companionship without demanding that she perform the role of devoted wife. After the public circuses of her marriages to Kennedy and Onassis, Tempelsman's quiet presence was exactly what Jackie needed. He read manuscripts she was editing, discussed books and art, and gave her the intellectual partnership she had always wanted. By the mid-1980s, with Caroline graduated from Radcliffe and John enrolled at Brown University, Jackie had successfully raised her children to independent adulthood, despite unimaginable public scrutiny. Both had developed into thoughtful, capable adults who maintained relatively normal lives despite their extraordinary family history. This achievement, more than any editorial project or social accomplishment, represented Jackie's greatest success during these years. The apartment had witnessed Caroline's graduation party, John's 21st birthday celebration, holiday gatherings with family, and countless quiet evenings of reading and conversation. It had served as sanctuary during difficult times and home base during happy ones. It had protected Jackie's privacy while allowing her to build professional credibility. It had given her children stability while giving her the freedom to become the person she actually wanted to be. For 20 years, from 1964 to 1984, Jackie had fought for and won the private life she deserved. The apartment at 1045th Avenue was the physical manifestation of that victory, proof that even the most public woman in America could claim the right to live on her own terms, to work for her own satisfaction, to love without performing for cameras, to simply be herself rather than the icon everyone expected. Final decade, the years from 1984 to 1994, brought Jackie into her 50s and early 60s, a period when she fully inhabited the independent life she had constructed so carefully. Her children were launched into their own lives, her professional reputation was established, and her relationship with Morris Tempelsman provided steady companionship. For the first time since childhood, Jackie was living entirely for herself rather than for a husband's career, her children's needs, or the public's expectations. At Doubleday, Jackie's editorial work reached its peak during these years. She acquired and edited major projects that demonstrated both her cultural influence and her genuine editorial skill. She worked with Russian ballet dancer Chelsea Kirkland on her memoir, bringing her lifelong love of ballet to shape a book that revealed the art form's demanding reality. She edited books about Egyptian antiquities, French gardens, and American historic preservation, each project reflecting her scholarly interests. One of Jackie's most significant editorial achievements was acquiring Michael Jackson's autobiography Moonwalk in 1988. The project demonstrated her willingness to engage with contemporary culture rather than remaining trapped in the past, her ability to work with artists from very different backgrounds, and her understanding that publishing required both commercial success and artistic merit. She approached Jackson with the same professionalism she brought to all authors, editing his manuscript with care and helping craft a book that became a major bestseller. Jackie also championed books about social issues that mattered to her. She edited Carly Simon's children's books, worked on projects about women's rights, and supported books examining American culture with critical intelligence. Her editorial choices revealed a thoughtful engagement with contemporary issues rather than nostalgic retreat to her own historical moment. She was living in the present, thinking about the future, refusing to be frozen in 1963. The work was genuinely satisfying. Jackie arrived at Doubleday's office 4 mornings per week, attended editorial meetings where her opinions carried weight based on merit rather than celebrity, and spent afternoons reading manuscripts in her library at Fifth Avenue. She edited with blue pencil and handwritten notes, providing detailed feedback that authors genuinely valued. The routine gave structure and purpose to her days while allowing time for grandchildren, cultural events, and the private life she protected so carefully. Jackie's role as grandmother brought new dimensions to the Fifth Avenue apartment. Caroline married Edwin Schlossberg in 1986, and their first child, Rose, was born in 1988, followed by Tatiana in 1990 and John in 1993. Jackie was a devoted grandmother, transforming one of the apartment's bedrooms into a playroom filled with toys and books, hosting family dinners where toddlers joined adults at the table, and finding joy in the ordinary chaos of young children. Watching her grandchildren play in the same apartment where she had raised Caroline and John through their trauma-filled childhoods moved Jackie deeply. The apartment had witnessed so much grief and anxiety during the 1960s, when Caroline had nightmares about her father's death, and John struggled with the burden of being the fatherless son of a martyred president. Now it held happier memories, birthday parties, holiday celebrations, the sounds of children's laughter rather than tears. John Jr. remained closer to home than Caroline, working as an assistant district attorney in Manhattan and living nearby. He frequently stopped by the Fifth Avenue apartment for dinners with his mother, bringing news of his work and his life. Jackie worried about John's safety. He was extraordinarily handsome and increasingly famous in his own right, constantly photographed and pursued by media. But she respected his independence and supported his choices. In 1988, John was named Sexiest Man Alive by People magazine, thrusting him into a new level of celebrity that Jackie found troubling. She had worked so hard to give her children normal lives, and now John was being reduced to a physical specimen for public consumption, objectified in ways that echoed her own treatment during the White House years. She counseled him about maintaining privacy, about the difference between public persona and private self, about protecting what truly mattered from the world's intrusive gaze. Jackie's own public appearances during these years were carefully limited and strategically chosen. She attended cultural events that mattered to her: Metropolitan Opera performances, ballet premieres, museum exhibition openings. She was photographed at these events but rarely granted interviews, maintaining the mystique that had protected her privacy for decades. She understood that scarcity increased value, that being seen occasionally kept public curiosity satisfied without inviting the kind of obsessive attention that made normal life impossible. Her fashion choices during these years reflected mature confidence rather than trendsetting ambition. She favored simple, elegant clothing from designers like Carolina Herrera and Valentino, classics that would age gracefully rather than date immediately. She wore oversized sunglasses that became part of her signature look, a practical tool for avoiding eye contact with strangers while projecting glamorous mystery. Her style was about personal comfort and appropriate elegance rather than magazine covers or fashion influence. Jackie's friendship circle remained small and carefully curated. She valued quality over quantity, preferring deep relationships with a few trusted friends to superficial connections with many. She maintained friendships with writers, artists, and intellectuals who shared her interests, people like Morris Sendak, whose children's books she edited, and historian Arthur Schlesinger Jr., who had served in her husband's administration but valued her for herself rather than her political past. Travel during these years took Jackie to places she loved. Paris, where she could walk streets as a relatively anonymous woman rather than American icon. Martha's Vineyard, where she purchased property and built a home designed for privacy and simplicity, and occasionally to exotic locations for research related to her editorial projects. She traveled comfortably rather than ostentatiously, preferring quality experiences to publicized luxury. Morris Tempelsman's presence in Jackie's life during these years provided steady companionship without drama. He was intelligent, cultured, successful in business, and content with a private relationship that never required marriage or public performance. They attended cultural events together, traveled together, and shared daily life at the Fifth Avenue apartment without feeling compelled to formalize their partnership. For Jackie, who had experienced two very different marriages, this arrangement was ideal. The apartment itself evolved with Jackie's changing needs. She updated furnishings occasionally, but maintained the overall aesthetic she had established in the 1960s. Comfortable elegance, pale colors, rooms designed for living rather than display. She added artwork as she discovered pieces she loved, usually through galleries rather than auctions, preferring to support living artists. Her book collection continued growing, shelves filling with first editions, manuscripts from authors she edited, and volumes on subjects that fascinated her. By the early 1990s, Jackie was in her 60s, financially secure, professionally accomplished, surrounded by family she loved. She had survived tragedies that would have destroyed many people and had built a life of genuine substance beyond her famous name. She worked at meaningful projects, maintained important friendships, enjoyed her grandchildren, and lived each day according to her own preferences rather than others' expectations. But in late 1993, Jackie began experiencing symptoms she initially dismissed: swollen lymph nodes in her neck, persistent fatigue, slight fever. She attributed these to minor infections and continued her normal routine. By December, the symptoms worsened enough that she consulted her doctor, who ordered tests. The results came in January 1994: non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, an aggressive cancer of the lymphatic system. The diagnosis was devastating but not entirely shocking. Jackie had lost both her father and her stepfather to cancer, and she understood the disease's serious implications. Her doctors recommended aggressive chemotherapy, which Jackie began immediately. She approached treatment with characteristic determination, maintaining her work schedule as much as possible, continuing to edit manuscripts between chemotherapy sessions, refusing to surrender to the disease without fighting. But the cancer proved resistant to treatment. By March, it was clear the chemotherapy was not working, and the lymphoma was spreading rapidly. Jackie's doctors acknowledged there was little more they could do beyond managing her pain and making her comfortable. Given perhaps weeks or months to live, Jackie made a decision that reflected everything she valued. She would die at home, in the apartment that had been her sanctuary for 30 years, surrounded by family and the possessions that represented her actual life rather than her public legend. In April 1994, Jackie stopped working and focused on settling her affairs. She updated her will, made arrangements for her estate, and spent time with Caroline, John, and her grandchildren. She remained in the Fifth Avenue apartment, the place where she had raised her children, built her career, found love again, and finally claimed the private life she deserved. If her life had to end, it would end here, in the home that represented her greatest victory, the right to live on her own terms. Final days. By early May 1994, Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis knew she was dying. The non-Hodgkin's lymphoma had spread throughout her body despite aggressive chemotherapy, and her doctors had gently acknowledged that further treatment would only cause suffering without offering hope of recovery. Jackie, at 64 years old, faced death with the same dignity and determination she had brought to every other challenge in her remarkable life. She chose to spend her final weeks at apartment 1040 on Fifth Avenue, the home that had sheltered her for 30 years. Caroline and John arranged for round-the-clock nursing care, ensuring their mother would be comfortable and never alone. Morris Tempelsman stayed close, reading to Jackie, holding her hand, providing the steady companionship that had meant so much during their years together. The apartment became a quiet space of farewell, where the most public woman of her generation could die privately, surrounded only by people who loved her for herself rather than her fame. Jackie's physical decline was rapid once the chemotherapy stopped. The cancer caused extreme fatigue, making even simple activities exhausting. She lost significant weight, her famous beauty fading under the disease's assault. But her mind remained sharp, and she used her remaining strength to ensure everything was in order for the people she loved. She reviewed her will carefully with her lawyer, making certain her estate would be divided fairly among her children, and that specific items would go to people who would appreciate their significance. Her most precious possessions were distributed with characteristic thoughtfulness. She left specific jewelry pieces to Caroline and to Caroline's daughters, ensuring family treasures would pass to the next generation. She designated certain books and artwork for John, items that reflected their shared interests and memories. She made charitable bequests to organizations that had mattered to her, cultural institutions, historic preservation societies, literacy programs. Even in death, she was teaching her children the importance of supporting causes larger than oneself. Jackie also spent time destroying personal documents she did not want to survive her. She had kept extensive journals over the years, private writings that recorded her thoughts about the Kennedy assassination, her marriages, her struggles with public life. She burned these journals page by page, ensuring her private reflections would remain private forever. She had spent 40 years protecting her interior life from public consumption, and she was determined that death would not breach those carefully maintained boundaries. Nancy Tuckerman, Jackie's longtime friend and former social secretary, visited frequently during these final weeks. She had known Jackie since their school days together and understood better than most the gap between public image and private reality. Together, they reminisced about Paris in the 1950s, about the White House years, about all the transformations Jackie had navigated. Tuckerman brought photographs and mementos that sparked memories, allowing Jackie to revisit her life on her own terms rather than through the public's mythologized version. Caroline and John struggled with the approaching loss of their mother, the parent who had protected them so fiercely and loved them so completely. They had already lost their father to assassination. Now they would lose the person who had held their family together through impossible circumstances. They sat with Jackie for hours, sometimes talking, sometimes simply being present. She offered them final advice about living with grace under scrutiny, about maintaining privacy without appearing cold, about building lives of substance beyond their famous name. Jackie's relationship with her grandchildren during these final weeks was particularly poignant. Rose, Tatiana, and baby John were too young to understand fully what was happening, but Jackie wanted them to have memories of her even if those memories would be fragmentary. She read them stories in a weakening voice, held them gently, and told them she loved them. These small domestic moments, so ordinary yet so precious, represented everything Jackie had fought for: the right to be simply a grandmother rather than a historical monument, to love her family without performing for cameras. As May progressed, Jackie's condition deteriorated significantly. She required increasing amounts of pain medication, which made her drowsy and sometimes confused. But during lucid moments, she remained herself, sharp, private, determined to control what she could even as her body failed. She insisted on dying in her own bed rather than in a hospital, on maintaining some measure of independence even at the end. Morris Tempelsman read to Jackie during her final days, choosing passages from French poetry and literature she had loved since her year at the Sorbonne. The words connected her to the young woman she had been before fame and tragedy, transformed her into an icon, reminded her of dreams and possibilities from a time when life seemed open rather than prescribed. He was honoring not just the woman dying in front of him, but the full complexity of the person she had been across 64 years of extraordinary life. By mid-May, it was clear the end was very near. Jackie drifted in and out of consciousness, no longer eating, barely drinking. Her family gathered close, keeping vigil. The apartment was quiet except for soft voices and the sounds of the city 15 floors below. Central Park, which Jackie had looked out on for 30 years, was spring green and alive with tourists and New Yorkers enjoying warm weather. Life continued ordinarily, while inside apartment 1040, one of the 20th century's most significant lives was ending. On the evening of May 19, 1994, Jackie's breathing became labored and irregular. Caroline and John sat on either side of their mother's bed, holding her hands. Morris stood nearby, witnessing the final moments of the woman he loved. At 10:15 p.m., Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis took her last breath and died peacefully, surrounded by the people she loved most, in the home that had represented her greatest victory, the right to live and die on her own terms. The immediate aftermath was carefully managed. Nancy Tuckerman, acting as spokesperson, released a brief statement. Last night at around 10:15 Mrs. Jackie Kennedy Onassis passed away in her apartment in New York City, surrounded by her friends and family and her books, and the people and the things that she loved. The statement's simplicity reflected Jackie's preferences, factual, dignified, revealing nothing unnecessary. News of Jackie's death spread quickly, prompting an outpouring of public grief that rivaled the reaction to President Kennedy's assassination 31 years earlier. Television networks interrupted regular programming to announce her passing and broadcast retrospectives of her life. Newspapers prepared special editions. Crowds gathered outside 1045th Avenue, leaving flowers and notes of condolence. The world mourned the woman they thought they knew, even though most had never understood the complexity of the actual person behind the famous image. But inside the apartment, Jackie's family focused on private grief and practical arrangements. There was no state funeral, no lying in state, no public viewing. Jackie had left explicit instructions that her funeral should be small, private, and dignified. She would be buried beside President Kennedy at Arlington National Cemetery, fulfilling her duty as his widow one final time. But the service itself would reflect her own preferences rather than public expectations. Jackie's will, filed on May 23rd, revealed an estate valued at approximately $43 million. The majority went to Caroline and John, with specific bequests to other family members and charitable organizations. She left $100,000 to her longtime maid, Providence Pairds, and smaller amounts to other staff members who had served her faithfully over the years. The will demonstrated Jackie's appreciation for people who had enabled her private life while respecting her boundaries. On May 23, 1994, a private funeral mass was held at the Church of St. Ignatius Loyola on Park Avenue, just blocks from the Fifth Avenue apartment. Only about 100 people attended, including family, close friends, and a few political figures who had known Jackie personally. President Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton attended, representing official Washington, but the service was not a state occasion. It was a farewell organized by Jackie's children according to their mother's wishes. The eulogy, delivered by Morris Tempelsman, was brief and personal, focusing on Jackie's love of literature, her editorial accomplishments, and her devotion to her children and grandchildren. He did not dwell on her years as First Lady or her role in American history. He honored the private woman he had known and loved, the person Jackie had worked so hard to be despite the world's insistence on defining her by tragedy and fame. After the service, Jackie's casket was flown to Washington for burial at Arlington National Cemetery. She was laid to rest beside President Kennedy and their 2 infant children who had died in infancy. The burial was private, attended only by family and close friends. There was no lengthy ceremony, no military pageantry, no crowds of mourners. Jackie was finally beyond the public's reach, at rest after 64 years of navigating the impossible space between private person and public icon. The apartment at 1045th Avenue stood empty for a time after Jackie's death, filled with the possessions that had surrounded her final days, but missing the presence that had given them meaning. Eventually, Caroline and John sorted through their mother's belongings, keeping items with personal significance and donating others to museums and institutions Jackie had supported. The apartment itself was sold, returning to the anonymous privacy of New York real estate rather than becoming a shrine or museum. Legacy lives in the months following Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis's death in May 1994. The world struggled to reconcile the public icon with the private person who had died at apartment 1040 on Fifth Avenue. For 3 decades, Jackie had carefully controlled her image, revealing just enough to maintain public interest while protecting her authentic self from scrutiny. With her death, that control ended, and a more complex picture began to emerge. The publication of her will provide unexpected insights into Jackie's values and priorities. Beyond the major bequests to her children, the document revealed thoughtful gifts to staff members, substantial charitable donations, and specific instructions about distributing personal items. She left her personal book collection to the John F. Kennedy Presidential Library, ensuring the volumes that had sustained her intellectual life would be preserved and made accessible to researchers. She designated artwork for specific museums, supporting institutions that had enriched her own cultural education. More revealing were the items Jackie had destroyed before her death. The burned journals represented her final assertion of privacy, her determination that certain thoughts and experiences would remain hers alone. Historians and biographers would forever speculate about what those pages contained, what Jackie really thought about her marriages, her public role, the assassination she had witnessed. But Jackie had denied them that access, maintaining even in death the boundaries she had fought to establish in life. The sale of apartment 1040 in 1995 marked the end of an era. The cooperative sold for approximately $10 million, a price that reflected Manhattan real estate values rather than historical significance. The new owners renovated extensively, removing Jackie's decorative choices and reconfiguring spaces to suit their own needs. The apartment that had been Jackie's sanctuary for 30 years became once again just another luxury residence on Fifth Avenue, its historical importance unmarked by plaques or public recognition. Caroline Kennedy and John F. Kennedy Jr. navigated their grief while facing renewed public scrutiny. The media that had respected certain boundaries during Jackie's lifetime felt free to speculate more openly about the family after her death. Caroline, who had always been more private, largely withdrew from public view, focusing on her own family and her work with cultural institutions. John, more comfortable with public attention, continued building his career and eventually founded George Magazine, a political publication that sought to make politics accessible and engaging. The items Jackie had edited during her 20-year publishing career remained as perhaps her most tangible professional legacy. The books she had championed continued selling, introducing new readers to subjects she had cared about deeply. Authors she had worked with spoke movingly about her editorial insight, her willingness to push for excellence, her genuine engagement with their work. She had not been merely a celebrity lending her name. She had been a skilled editor making real contributions to American publishing. Jackie's influence on historic preservation became clearer after her death. Her work restoring the White House had set standards for treating historic buildings with curatorial care rather than casual updating. Her advocacy had helped save Grand Central Terminal from demolition in the 1970s, preserving one of New York's most important landmarks. Her involvement with the Municipal Art Society and other preservation organizations had shaped American attitudes toward protecting architectural heritage. These accomplishments mattered independent of her famous name, representing genuine expertise and commitment. The John F. Kennedy Presidential Library and Museum in Boston held the most comprehensive collection of materials related to Jackie's life, though she had been careful about what she donated during her lifetime. The archives included her correspondence as First Lady, photographs from the White House years, and some personal papers she deemed appropriate for historical research. But Jackie had been selective, ensuring researchers would see only what she wanted them to see, maintaining control over her narrative even through archival donations. In 1999, tragedy struck again when John F. Kennedy Jr., his wife Carolyn, and her sister Lauren died in a plane crash off Martha's Vineyard. John was piloting the small aircraft to a family wedding when it went down in darkness and haze, killing all three instantly. The loss devastated Caroline, who had now lost her father, mother, and brother, and it shocked a nation that had watched John grow from the little boy, saluting his father's coffin to a charismatic adult. John's death meant that apartment 1040, which Jackie had hoped might someday house her son's own family, would never serve that purpose. The continuity she had imagined, the possibility of passing the sanctuary she had created to the next generation, was broken by the same kind of sudden tragedy that had defined so much of the Kennedy family story. Caroline alone survived to carry forward Jackie's legacy, to remember the private person behind the public image. As years passed and cultural memory shifted, younger generations encountered Jackie not through lived experience, but through historical representation. She appeared in films, television series, books, and countless magazine retrospectives, often reduced to fashion icon or tragic widow rather than the complex, intelligent woman she had actually been. The pink Chanel suit, the pillbox hat, the image of her walking behind the casket, these frozen moments overshadowed her editorial career, her intellectual interests, her evolution from young widow to accomplished professional. But those who had known Jackie personally worked to preserve a more accurate understanding. Her colleagues from Doubleday spoke about her editorial rigor and genuine expertise. Friends described her sharp intelligence, her dry wit, her ability to maintain boundaries without seeming cold. Authors she had worked with shared stories of her thoughtful feedback and creative insight. Slowly, a fuller picture emerged of a woman who had succeeded in living two distinct lives: the public icon the world demanded, and the private person she had fought to protect and develop. The Metropolitan Museum of Art, directly across Fifth Avenue from Jackie's apartment, benefited significantly from her support and eventually displayed exhibitions featuring items from her personal collection. These shows allowed the public to see Jackie's taste and discernment divorced from celebrity context, to appreciate her genuine expertise in decorative arts and her scholarly approach to collecting. The exhibitions revealed that her famous style was built on deep knowledge rather than superficial trend following. Martha's Vineyard, where Jackie had purchased property and built a home during her final years, became an important site for understanding her later life. The house, designed for privacy and simplicity, reflected Jackie's evolution away from the grand estates of her youth toward spaces that prioritized comfort and authenticity. The island itself represented the kind of place where she could achieve relative anonymity, where summer residents respected privacy, and where she could walk beaches and read on her porch without constant intrusion. Caroline Kennedy's own career honored her mother's example in subtle ways. She became an author, writing books about constitutional law and American history. She served as ambassador to Japan from 2013 to 2017, representing the United States with the same grace and intelligence her mother had brought to diplomatic duties as First Lady. She supported cultural institutions and historic preservation, continuing work her mother had championed, but she also maintained fierce privacy about her personal life, protecting her children from excessive publicity, just as Jackie had protected her. The apartment at 1045th Avenue changed hands several times in the decades after Jackie's death, each owner making modifications that erased more evidence of her 30-year residence. By 2020, almost nothing remained of Jackie's decorative choices or spatial arrangements. The rooms where she had edited manuscripts, raised her children, hosted dinners with intellectuals, and finally died had been completely transformed. The apartment was once again anonymous, indistinguishable from any other luxury residence on Manhattan's Upper East Side. But the apartment's significance was never really about its physical features. It was about what it represented: a private sanctuary where the most public woman in America had claimed the right to live on her own terms, to work at what interested her, to love without performing, to raise her children away from crushing scrutiny. It was about the victory of asserting privacy in an age of increasing exposure, of maintaining dignity without arrogance, of being genuinely accomplished rather than merely famous. Jackie's final gift to American culture might have been the example she set, that it was possible to survive unbearable tragedy and public scrutiny while preserving one's essential self, to be both public figure and private person, to build a meaningful life beyond the roles others assigned. She had refused to be only the grieving widow, only the fashion icon, only the political wife. She had insisted on being a working professional, a devoted mother, an intellectual, a complex human being with interests and accomplishments that mattered independent of her famous name. The apartment at 1045th Avenue had made that insistence possible. Within its walls, Jackie had finally found what wealth and privilege had never automatically provided: the freedom to be herself, the space to develop her own identity, the sanctuary where she could rest from the exhausting performance of being Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis. What remains today, more than 3 decades after Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis's death, her legacy exists in complex layers that resist simple summary. The public continues to be fascinated by the image: the elegant First Lady, the tragic widow, the fashion icon. But deeper understanding reveals a woman whose true achievement was surviving impossible circumstances while building a life of genuine substance beyond her famous name. The apartment at 1045th Avenue still stands on the corner of 5th Avenue and 85th Street, its limestone facade unchanged since Rosario Candela designed the building in 1925. Pedestrians walk past daily without knowing that apartment 1040, on the 10th floor, was once home to one of the 20th century's most significant women. There are no historical markers, no plaques explaining the building's connection to American history. The cooperative board has maintained the privacy that attracted Jackie in the first place, treating the building as a residence rather than a tourist destination. Current residents of 1045th Avenue enjoy the same advantages Jackie valued: proximity to Central Park and the Metropolitan Museum, a prestigious address, and most importantly, privacy protected by attentive staff and a selective board. The building continues to house wealthy New Yorkers who appreciate discretion, who understand that true luxury includes freedom from unwanted attention. In this way, the building still serves the purpose Jackie recognized when she chose it in 1964, providing sanctuary for people who need protection from public scrutiny. Inside apartment 1040, all evidence of Jackie's residence has been erased by successive renovations. The rooms where she edited manuscripts have been reconfigured. The bedroom where she died has been transformed. The library where she spent thousands of hours reading has been incorporated into different spatial arrangements. The apartment's current owners have no obligation to preserve its historical significance, and they have chosen to create spaces suited to their own needs rather than maintaining a shrine to a previous resident. This anonymity would have pleased Jackie, who never wanted her home to become a museum or tourist attraction. She had spent enough of her life having private spaces invaded and examined. The apartment had served its purpose as sanctuary while she lived. She would not have wanted it frozen in time after her death. Better that it return to ordinary use, that it continue housing people rather than preserving memory. The John F. Kennedy Presidential Library and Museum in Boston remains the primary repository for materials related to Jackie's life as First Lady. The library holds approximately 50,000 photographs documenting her White House years, correspondence, and materials related to her restoration work. Researchers can access these collections to study Jackie's contributions to American culture and politics. But characteristically, Jackie had been selective about what she donated, ensuring the archive presented the image she wanted preserved while protecting genuinely private materials. The Kennedy Library's replica of Jackie's White House bedroom allows visitors to see the style she brought to the executive mansion, the elegant simplicity that redefined American interior decoration in the early 1960s. But this carefully curated display reveals only what Jackie wanted revealed: the messy reality of marriage to a compulsive philanderer, the anxiety of raising children under impossible scrutiny, the private grief and frustration. These remain hidden, protected by Jackie's lifetime of careful boundary maintenance. At Arlington National Cemetery, Jackie's grave lies beside President Kennedy's, marked by a simple flat stone that gives her name, birth year, and death year. The eternal flame that Jackie lit at Jack's funeral in 1963 still burns, drawing thousands of visitors annually who come to pay respects to America's martyred president and his elegant young widow. The site represents Jackie's public role, the historical significance she could never escape, the way she will forever be linked to those 1,000 days of Camelot, despite living another 31 years beyond Jack's assassination. But anyone seeking to understand the real Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis needs to look beyond Arlington, beyond the Kennedy Library's carefully curated collections, beyond the endless magazine retrospectives that reduce her to fashion icon or tragic widow. The real Jackie is found in the books she edited, the historic buildings she helped save, the privacy she fought for and won, the children she raised to independent adulthood despite impossible circumstances. The authors Jackie worked with at Viking Press and Doubleday left the most nuanced testimony about her actual abilities and character. They described an editor who read manuscripts carefully, asked intelligent questions, pushed for excellence, and cared genuinely about quality rather than merely lending her name for commercial advantage. She had real editorial skill developed through years of serious work, genuine expertise in subjects she had studied deeply, and professional integrity that earned colleagues respect. Buildings Jackie helped preserve stand as physical monuments to her advocacy. Grand Central Terminal, saved from demolition through preservation battles Jackie supported in the 1970s, continues serving millions of commuters annually. The structure represents not just architectural beauty, but the principle that cities should honor their history rather than thoughtlessly destroying it for short-term profit. Jackie's involvement in that fight demonstrated commitment to causes beyond herself and willingness to use her fame for substantive purposes. The first edition's book series Jackie edited for Doubleday brought cultural subjects to general audiences in beautifully designed volumes. Books about the Russian court, about French gardens, about American landscape architecture. These projects reflected Jackie's genuine interests and made specialized knowledge accessible to readers who might not otherwise encounter it. The books remain in print and in library collections, quietly demonstrating Jackie's contribution to American publishing. Caroline Kennedy's own accomplished career honors her mother's example while establishing independent achievements. As ambassador to Japan and later to Australia, Caroline represented American interests with intelligence and grace. As author of books about constitutional law and civil liberties, she demonstrated the intellectual engagement Jackie had valued. As mother who protected her own children from excessive publicity, She continued the fierce advocacy for privacy that Jackie had pioneered. The irony of Jackie's life remains stark and poignant. She spent 40 years trying to escape being defined by the most traumatic day of her life, trying to build an identity based on her work and interests rather than her role as JFK's widow. Yet most people still know her primarily as the woman in the blood-stained pink suit, the elegant widow walking behind the casket, the first lady who made the White House beautiful. Her editorial career, her preservation work, her intellectual life, these achievements remain secondary in public consciousness to images from November 1963. But perhaps that disconnect matters less than Jackie's own understanding of her life. She knew she had raised her children successfully, had built a meaningful career, had loved and been loved, had protected her privacy and lived according to her own values in her final decades. She knew that the public would never fully understand the gap between their image of her and the reality of who she actually was. She had accepted that gap as the price of having been First Lady, having witnessed history, having become accidentally iconic. The apartment at 1045th Avenue had given Jackie the space to be herself rather than the icon, the freedom to work and think and live without constant performance. For 30 years, it had provided the privacy that wealth and fame had paradoxically made impossible. It had witnessed her transformation from devastated widow to accomplished professional, from the most public woman in America to a fiercely private person who had finally claimed the right to ordinary life. What remains of Jackie's legacy is not the furniture she chose or the rooms she decorated, not the clothes she wore or the parties she attended, but something more essential. The example of a woman who survived unbearable tragedy and public scrutiny while refusing to be reduced to victim or icon, who insisted on developing her own talents and living according to her own values, who protected what mattered while fulfilling her obligations to history. Stand today at the corner of 5th Avenue and 85th Street. Look up at the 10th floor of 1045th Avenue. The windows that once framed Jackie's view of Central Park still catch afternoon light. The rooms beyond those windows still shelter people seeking privacy and peace. The building maintains its elegant discretion, protecting residents from the city's intensity while providing access to its cultural riches. Nothing visible from the street indicates that Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis lived and died behind those windows, that she spent 30 years building the private life she deserved within those walls, that she edited books and raised children, and found love and finally achieved the independence that had eluded her through decades of performing for others' expectations. The anonymity is appropriate, even beautiful. Jackie had fought her entire adult life for the right to be private, to be ordinary, to be left alone. The apartment gave her that gift. Within its walls, she was not an icon or a monument. She was simply Jackie, editor, mother, grandmother, friend, woman reading manuscripts and walking her dogs and living each day according to her own preferences rather than the world's demands. The apartment was her greatest luxury because it allowed her to stop performing, to rest from the exhausting spectacle of being Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis. As afternoon light fades over Central Park and evening settles on Manhattan's Upper East Side, as lights begin glowing in apartments up and down Fifth Avenue, the building at 1040 looks like any other luxury residence housing wealthy New Yorkers. But someone who knows the hidden story might pause at the corner of 85th Street, might look up at the 10th floor, might imagine Jackie sitting at her desk editing a manuscript or standing at the window watching seasons change in the park below. And in that moment of imagining, the full complexity of her life becomes clear. Not the simplified icon of elegance or tragedy, but a real woman who survived impossible circumstances by creating private spaces where she could be authentically herself, who fought for 3 decades to live on her own terms despite the world's insistence on defining her by one traumatic day, who built meaningful work and deep relationships, and finally found the peace she had sought since childhood. That is the hidden story of Jackie Kennedy's private residence. Not the address or the square footage or the architectural details, but what it represented. The right to privacy, the freedom to be ordinary, the possibility of building an authentic life beyond fame's demands. The apartment at 1045th Avenue was where Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis finally won the victory that mattered most, the right to simply be herself. That is the hidden story of Jackie Kennedy's private residence.